The crack of a wheel breaking echoed across the barren landscape like a gunshot, causing Adelaide Hayes to clutch the reins of her startled horses with white knuckles. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving territory between Colorado and Utah stretched before her like a death sentence as her wagon lurched to a sickening halt. "Whoa, whoa," she called to her team, her heart racing as she assessed her dire situation. The rear axle had snapped clean through, leaving her wagon tilted precariously on the dusty trail. Adelaide wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her freckled face. At 24, she had faced her share of hardships, but being stranded in Comanche territory with a broken wagon and dwindling supplies was a nightmare come to life. Adelaide had been traveling for nearly 3 weeks from her home in Missouri after receiving news that her uncle had passed away, leaving her his modest ranch outside Park City, Utah. It was her chance at a new beginning after losing her parents to influenza the previous winter. Now, that chance seemed to be evaporating under the merciless western sun. She climbed down from the wagon seat, her boots landing in the dry dirt with a puff of dust. The vast emptiness surrounding her made her stomach twist with dread. Water was scarce, and she had only enough food for another week if she rationed carefully. Worse still, rumors of Comanche raids had followed her for the past 100 miles. Adelaide was examining the broken axle when she heard the distinct sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. She straightened, shading her eyes against the setting sun, her free hand moving to the small revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the crimson sky. The stranger approached cautiously, and as he drew nearer, Adelaide could make out his features. He sat tall in the saddle of a magnificent chestnut stallion, with broad shoulders and a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were trail-worn but well-kept denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice deep and resonant as he stopped his horse several yards away, a respectful distance that told Adelaide he understood a woman alone might be wary of strangers. "Good afternoon," she replied, her hand still resting on her concealed weapon. The man dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Looks like you've got yourself quite a predicament here." His eyes, as blue as the Montana sky, assessed the wagon with practiced efficiency. "Name's Garrett Kane. Most folks just call me Gar." "Adelaide Hayes," she replied, relaxing slightly but remaining vigilant. "My axle's broken clean through. I'm headed to Park City." Garrett whistled low. "That's still a good 100 miles northwest, and this isn't exactly friendly country to be stranded in." He glanced around, his experienced gaze scanning the horizon. "Comanche have been active in these parts lately. It's not safe for anyone to be out here alone, especially not a lady." "I'm well aware of the danger, Mr. Kane," Adelaide said, lifting her chin. "But I haven't much choice in the matter now, have I?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, and something in his eyes softened. "No, I suppose you don't." He removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair with threads of silver at the temples. Despite his weathered appearance, Adelaide guessed he couldn't be much past 35. "I'll get you through this, Miss Hayes, if you'll allow me to help." There was something in his steady gaze that made Adelaide trust him, despite all the warnings she'd heard about strangers in the West. Or perhaps it was simply that she had no alternative. "I'd be grateful for your assistance, Mr. Kane," she said finally, "though I have little to offer in payment." Garrett replaced his hat and moved toward the wagon. "Let's worry about getting you safely to Park City first. Payment can wait." He examined the broken axle, running his hands along the splintered wood. "This can't be fixed on the trail. We'll need to find you a new one." "Is there a settlement nearby?" Adelaide asked hopefully. Garrett nodded. "Small trading post about 15 miles north. Fellow named Jacobson runs it. Might have what we need, but we won't make it before dark." He looked at the sky where the sun was already beginning its descent. "We should make camp soon, find someplace defensible." Adelaide nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of her exhaustion. She'd been pushing hard for days, sleeping fitfully with one eye open. The prospect of having someone to share the watch was more appealing than she cared to admit. "I have supplies," she offered. "Food, coffee." "I've got some jerky and beans myself," Garrett replied. "First, let's get your belongings and team somewhere safer." For the next hour, they worked together to unhitch the team and salvage what they could from the wagon. Garrett was efficient and respectful, never prying into her personal items or questioning why a woman was traveling alone through such dangerous territory. Adelaide appreciated his discretion as much as his help. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they made camp in a small ravine that offered some protection from the wind and prying eyes. Garrett built a small, smokeless fire while Adelaide prepared a modest meal of beans, salt pork, and the last of her cornbread. "This is mighty fine cooking, Miss Hayes," Garrett said as he savored a bite of cornbread. "Been a long while since I've had anything home cooked." Adelaide smiled despite herself. "Thank you. My mother was insistent that I learn to cook properly, even on the trail." The mention of her mother brought a familiar ache to her chest, but she pushed it aside. "You seem to know these lands well, Mr. Kane." Garrett nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "Been riding these territories for almost 20 years now. Started as a ranch hand in Texas when I was 15, worked my way up to trail boss by 25. Last few years, I've been scouting for the Army, tracking, guiding settlers." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "What brings you to Park City, if you don't mind my asking?" Adelaide hesitated, then decided there was no harm in telling him the truth. "My uncle, Henry Hayes, passed away last month, left me his ranch outside Park City. I'm all that's left of the family now, so I'm going to try to make a go of it." "Henry Hayes?" Garrett's eyebrows rose slightly. "Old cranky fellow with a limp and the best damn quarter horses this side of the Mississippi." Adelaide couldn't help but laugh. "That sounds like Uncle Henry. Did you know him?" "Met him a few times over the years. Bought a mare from him once, finest horse I ever owned." Garrett's expression grew thoughtful. "His place is good land. Has a creek running year-round, decent grazing. It's a fine inheritance, Miss Hayes. If I ever reach it," she said quietly. "You will," Garrett assured her, his voice firm with conviction. "I promise to get you through this, and I mean to keep that promise." As night fell completely, they took turns keeping watch. Adelaide insisted on taking her fair share of the duty, and Garrett didn't argue, which raised him further in her estimation. Most men would have insisted she rest while they played the gallant protector. During her watch, Adelaide found herself studying Garrett as he slept. In repose, the hard lines of his face softened, making him appear younger. There was something about him that spoke of both strength and kindness, a rare combination in her experience. She wondered about his story, the paths he'd walked that had brought him to this place and time, crossing her broken trail. The night passed without incident, and they broke camp at first light. Garrett helped Adelaide secure what remained of her belongings on one of the pack horses, and they set off toward the trading post with Adelaide riding her mare and leading the rest of her team. "Mr. Jacobson isn't the most welcoming sort," Garrett warned as they rode, "but he's fair in his dealings and doesn't water down his whiskey, which counts for something out here. I've dealt with difficult men before," Adelaide replied. "My father was a merchant. I helped with the books and occasionally with difficult customers." Garrett glanced at her with new interest. "A woman with a head for figures is a rare thing out here. Might serve you well on that ranch." "I hope so," Adelaide said, "though I know more about ledgers than livestock at this point." "Ranching can be learned," Garrett said. "The will to survive and adapt, that's what matters out here, and you seem to have plenty of that, Miss Hayes." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, and Adelaide found herself studying his profile as he rode beside her. The morning sun highlighted the strong line of his jaw, the straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. As they rode, Garrett pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife, teaching Adelaide to read the land as they traveled. He showed her how to identify water sources from the vegetation patterns and how to spot game trails that might lead to streams. "The land speaks if you learn to listen," he told her. "Most folks out here who don't make it fail because they try to fight the land instead of understanding it." By midday, the trading post came into view, a squat, weathered building surrounded by a rough corral and a few outbuildings. A handful of horses stood in the corral, and smoke curled from the chimney, the only sign of life in the otherwise desolate landscape. "Stay close," Garrett murmured as they approached. "There are all sorts who pass through these places." The trading post's interior was dim and musty, crammed with goods ranging from basic supplies to luxury items destined for the wealthier settlements further west. A grizzled man with a patchy beard stood behind the counter, eyeing them suspiciously as they entered. "Kane," he acknowledged with a nod. "Been a while." "Jacobson," Garrett returned the greeting. "We're in need of a wagon axle. The lady's rig broke down about 15 miles south." Jacobson's eyes shifted to Adelaide, and she met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by his scrutiny. After a moment, he grunted and jerked his thumb toward the back of the store. "Might have something that'll work. Won't be cheap, though." "Never is," Garrett replied dryly. While Garrett negotiated for the axle and some additional supplies, Adelaide wandered the store, taking inventory of items that might be useful for her new home. She was examining a set of well-crafted cooking pots when she became aware of being watched. Two men sat at a small table in the corner, playing cards and drinking whiskey despite the early hour. One of them, a thin man with a pockmarked face, was staring at her with undisguised interest. The other, broader and older with a scar running through his left eyebrow, kicked his companion under the table. "Eyes back in your head, Deke," he muttered. "That one's with Kane." The name was spoken with a mixture of respect and wariness that piqued Adelaide's curiosity. Clearly, Garrett had a reputation, though whether good or bad remained to be seen. She moved casually back toward the counter where Garrett was completing his transaction. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back as they exited, a gesture that might have offended her in other circumstances, but now felt reassuring. "We've got the axle," he said once they were outside, "and I've arranged for a room for you for the night. There's a small cabin behind the trading post that Jacobson rents out occasionally." "And where will you stay?" Adelaide asked. "I'll sleep in the stable with the horses," Garrett replied. "Best to keep an eye on them. Some of the clientele here have flexible ideas about property ownership." Adelaide frowned. "I don't like taking the cabin while you sleep in a stable." Garrett's expression softened. "I've slept in far worse places, Miss Hayes. Besides, a lady needs her privacy." He glanced back at the trading post. "We should move your things to the cabin now. We'll set out at first light tomorrow to retrieve your wagon." The cabin was small but clean enough, with a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small stove. Adelaide was grateful for the chance to wash away the trail dust and change into fresh clothing. By the time she emerged, Garrett had arranged for a hot meal to be brought from the trading post's small kitchen. They ate together in the cabin, with the door propped open for propriety's sake. The stew was surprisingly good, rich with chunks of venison and wild onions. "I noticed how those men reacted to you in there," Adelaide said after they'd eaten in comfortable silence for a while. "You seem to have quite the reputation, Mr. Kane." Garrett's expression revealed nothing. "A man builds all sorts of reputations out here, deserved or not." "And which is yours?" she pressed. He considered her question, taking a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I've been many things over the years, Miss Hayes. Some I'm proud of, others less so, but I've always tried to stand by my word." His eyes met hers directly. "And right now, my word is to see you safely to Park City." There was something in his steady gaze that made Adelaide believe him implicitly. "Thank you," she said simply. As evening fell, Garrett excused himself to check on the horses and secure their supplies. Adelaide settled in for the night, feeling safer than she had in weeks despite the rough surroundings. Through the small window, she could see Garrett's silhouette as he moved around the stable, methodical and vigilant. She found herself wondering what it would be like to have such a man around permanently, someone capable and trustworthy, who didn't underestimate her because she was a woman. The thought surprised her. She had come west seeking independence, not entanglement. Yet there was something about Garrett Kane that intrigued her more than any man she'd ever met. Morning came quickly, and they set out after a hasty breakfast. The journey back to Adelaide's wagon was tense but uneventful. Once there, Garrett set to work replacing the broken axle with practiced efficiency while Adelaide kept watch, her father's rifle across her lap. "You handle that rifle like you know how to use it," Garrett observed as he worked. "My father insisted I learn," Adelaide replied. "Said a woman alone needs to protect herself." "Wise man, your father." By mid-afternoon, the wagon was repaired and ready to travel. Garrett helped Adelaide reload her belongings, and they continued their journey toward Park City, now traveling together. The next few days established a comfortable routine. They rose at dawn, traveled until the heat of the day became too intense, rested during the worst hours, then continued until dusk. Each night, they set up camp together, sharing the duties of cooking and keeping watch. Adelaide found herself increasingly drawn to Garrett's quiet strength and unexpected moments of gentleness. He never spoke down to her or questioned her capabilities, instead teaching her new skills that would serve her well in her new life: how to track game, how to predict weather changes from the clouds, how to find north without a compass. On the third night, as they sat by the campfire, Garrett shared more of his past. He had been born in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. At 15, after his mother's death and a falling out with his father, he had headed west to seek his fortune. "I was angry and foolish," he admitted, staring into the flames. "Thought I'd strike it rich in the gold fields or become some famous gunslinger. Reality had other plans." "What happened?" Adelaide asked softly. "Life," Garrett replied with a rueful smile. "Learned blacksmithing was useful after all. Worked ranches, drove cattle, scouted for the army during the war." He paused, made mistakes, lost people, found a kind of peace in the open country. "And now," Adelaide asked, "where are you headed after Park City?" Garrett shrugged, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "I haven't decided yet. For the first time in a long while, I'm finding myself reluctant to move on too quickly." The admission hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Adelaide felt her cheeks warm and she looked away, suddenly very interested in the coffee grounds at the bottom of her cup. "Well," she said finally. "I imagine Park City has work for a man of your skills, at least temporarily." "Perhaps it does," he agreed, his voice gentle. The next day brought them into even more dangerous territory. The trail narrowed as it wound through a series of steep ravines where ambushes were common. Garrett rode ahead, alert and watchful, his rifle across his saddle. Midway through the afternoon, he signaled for Adelaide to stop. He dismounted silently and handed her his reins, then moved forward on foot, crouching low. Adelaide waited, her heart pounding, until he returned several minutes later. "Fresh tracks," he said quietly. "A small band of Comanche passed through here not 2 hours ago. 4, maybe 5 riders." Adelaide's grip tightened on the reins. "Are they likely to return?" "Hard to say. They were headed east, away from our path, but we should move quickly and find a defensible spot before nightfall." His eyes met hers. "We're still a good 5 days from Park City. The next stretch is the most dangerous." They pressed on, moving as quickly as the wagon would allow. By dusk, they had reached a small canyon with a spring-fed pool, a good place to make camp, with the high walls providing protection on 3 sides. As Adelaide prepared their evening meal, Garrett disappeared briefly, returning with a handful of wild onions and a small rabbit he had snared. The fresh meat made a welcome addition to their dwindling supplies. "You continue to surprise me, Mr. Kane," Adelaide said as she added the onions to the stew pot. "How so? Most men I've known would boast endlessly about such skills. You simply perform them without comment." Garrett smiled, the firelight catching the lines at the corners of his eyes. "Perhaps I'm trying to impress you." "Then you're succeeding," Adelaide admitted, surprising herself with her boldness. Something shifted in Garrett's gaze, a warmth, an intensity that made Adelaide's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might move closer, might reach for her. Instead, he cleared his throat and turned his attention to tending the fire. "Tell me about your plans for the ranch," he said after a moment. "What will you raise?" Adelaide allowed the change of subject, though she felt a twinge of disappointment. "Uncle Henry's letter mentioned cattle and horses. I know little about either, to be honest. I suppose I'll need to hire experienced hands to help me learn." "Good help is hard to find," Garrett warned. "Many will try to take advantage of a woman alone." "Then I shall have to be discerning in my choices," Adelaide replied. "Perhaps you might offer some advice when we reach Park City." "I'd be happy to," Garrett said. In fact, a distant sound interrupted him, the neighing of a horse somewhere beyond their camp. Garrett was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he whispered. "Keep your pistol ready." He disappeared into the darkness, moving silently despite his size. Adelaide drew her revolver and waited, straining her ears for any sound beyond the gentle crackling of the fire. Minutes stretched like hours until finally Garrett reappeared. "Comanche scouts," he said quietly. "2 of them watching our camp from the ridge above. They've moved on for now, but they know we're here." Fear clutched at Adelaide's chest. "What do? We leave now," Garrett decided. "Under cover of darkness. They won't expect that. We'll travel through the night, put as much distance between us and them as possible." They worked quickly, packing camp and hitching the team in near silence. Within half an hour, they were moving through the darkness, Garrett leading the way with only the stars to guide them. The night journey was tense and exhausting. Every sound made Adelaide jump. Every shadow seemed to hide potential danger. Garrett remained calm, his presence a steady anchor that kept her fear from turning to panic. Dawn found them in open plains, exposed but with a clear view in all directions. No pursuit was visible, though Garrett remained vigilant. "We should rest the horses," he said finally. "An hour, no more." They stopped in a small copse of trees that provided meager shade. While the horses drank from their water skins, Adelaide and Garrett ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack. "You held up well last night," Garrett commented, his admiration evident. "Many would have panicked." "I was terrified," Adelaide admitted. "I still am, but panic won't keep us alive." Garrett's hand found hers, giving it a brief, reassuring squeeze. "Fear keeps you sharp. It's only dangerous when it overwhelms reason." His touch sent a jolt through Adelaide that had nothing to do with fear. When he released her hand, she felt the absence keenly. They continued their journey through the day, pushing the team harder than was wise but necessary under the circumstances. By nightfall, they had covered an impressive distance, though they were still 3 days from Park City at best. That night, they made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be spotted from a distance. They ate another cheerless meal of trail rations and took turns sleeping, each standing watch for half the night. During her watch, Adelaide found herself studying Garrett's sleeping form, his face peaceful in repose. In just a few days, this stranger had become someone she trusted implicitly with her life. More than that, she realized with a start, she was coming to care for him in ways that went beyond gratitude. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She had come west seeking independence, not to find herself dependent on a man, no matter how capable. Yet there was something about Garrett Kane that didn't threaten her independence, rather, he seemed to respect and encourage it. The next morning brought clouds and the distant rumble of thunder. Rain would make travel more difficult but would also wash away their tracks, offering some protection from pursuit. "We'll push through as far as we can," Garrett decided after studying the sky. "There's a way station about 20 miles ahead. If we're lucky, we can reach it before the worst of the storm hits." They traveled steadily through the morning as the clouds darkened overhead. By noon, fat raindrops were beginning to fall and the wind had picked up considerably. "How much farther?" Adelaide called over the rising wind. "Another 10 miles, Garrett shouted back. "We'll make it." The storm hit in full fury an hour later, turning the trail to mud and reducing visibility to mere yards. The horses struggled, spooked by the thunder that crashed overhead. Adelaide's hands were numb with cold and strain as she fought to control the team. Garrett rode close beside the wagon, occasionally reaching over to help steady the reins when the team threatened to bolt. His hat was pulled low against the rain, his duster flapping in the wind like the wings of some great bird. Just when Adelaide thought they couldn't continue much longer, a structure appeared through the curtain of rain, the way station, a solid log building with a large stable attached. "Almost there," Garrett encouraged. They pulled into the yard and Garrett leapt from his horse to help Adelaide down from the wagon seat. She was shivering uncontrollably, her clothes soaked through. Garrett's arm around her waist was the only thing keeping her upright as they staggered toward the station door. The interior was blessedly warm, a large fireplace dominating one wall. The station keeper, a burly man with a shock of white hair, looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Sweet Jesus," he exclaimed, taking in their bedraggled appearance. "You folks rode through that mess." "Didn't have much choice," Garrett replied, helping Adelaide to a chair by the fire. "We need a room, stabling for our animals, and hot food if you've got it." "Got all 3, the keeper said. 2 bits for the room, another 3 for stabling and care of your stock. Food's included." Garrett didn't hesitate, pulling the coins from his pocket despite Adelaide's attempt to reach for her own purse. "I'll see to the animals," he told her. "Get yourself warm by the fire." He disappeared back into the storm before she could protest. The keeper's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, appeared with a steaming mug of coffee and a woolen blanket. "You're half frozen, poor thing," she clucked, wrapping the blanket around Adelaide's shoulders. "Drink this." I've got stew simmering and fresh bread just out of the oven." Adelaide accepted the coffee gratefully, its warmth seeping into her chilled bones. "Thank you. My companion, your husband, will be fine," the woman assured her. "My Jacob will help him with your team." Adelaide didn't correct the assumption, too tired to explain their actual relationship. Besides, there was something comforting about the misunderstanding, a glimpse into a life that might have been. Garrett returned 20 minutes later, soaked to the skin, but satisfied that their animals were properly cared for. The station keeper's wife immediately set about providing him with dry clothing her husband's, though several sizes too large, and another mug of coffee. Once they had both changed and eaten, the keeper's wife showed them to their room singular. Adelaide noted with a mixture of apprehension and something else she couldn't quite name. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a chair. "I'll sleep on the floor," Garrett said immediately, reading her discomfort. "I've had worse accommodations." "Don't be ridiculous," Adelaide replied, summoning her practical nature. "The floor is cold and you're as exhausted as I am. The bed is large enough for both of us if we're careful." Garrett raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "As you wish, Miss Hayes." They arranged themselves awkwardly on opposite sides of the bed, a bolster pillow placed between them as an improvised barrier. Adelaide lay rigid, intensely aware of Garrett's presence mere inches away. "I apologize for the presumption of the station keeper's wife," she said finally, if only to break the silence. Garrett chuckled softly. "No harm done. I've been called worse things than your husband." There was something in his voice, a wistfulness, perhaps, that made Adelaide turn her head toward him, though she could only make out his profile in the dim light. "Have you ever been married, Mr. Kane?" A pause. "No, never found the right woman." "Or perhaps never stayed in one place long enough to try." Another pause. "And you?" "There was an understanding once," Adelaide admitted. "The son of my father's business partner. A suitable match, everyone said, but when father's business failed and he fell ill, the understanding was no longer considered suitable." "His loss," Garrett said simply. The words warmed her more than they should have. "Thank you." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now. Adelaide found her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of the day overtaking her. "Rest," Garrett murmured, seeming to sense her struggle. "We're safe here." With his reassurance, Adelaide allowed herself to relax, and sleep claimed her swiftly. She woke sometime in the night to find that the bolster pillow had been pushed aside and she had gravitated toward Garrett's warmth. His arm was draped protectively over her waist, his breathing deep and even against her hair. She knew she should move away, restore the proper distance between them, but the comfort of his embrace was too powerful to resist. Instead, she allowed herself to nestle closer, just for this one night, and drifted back to sleep. Morning brought awkwardness as they both pretended the nocturnal embrace had never happened. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world and muddy trails. "We should wait a few hours," Garrett advised as they ate breakfast. "Let the trails dry out a bit. The mud will only slow us down and risk the wagon." Adelaide agreed, secretly grateful for the delay. She was still bone-tired despite the night's rest, and the thought of facing the trail immediately was daunting. They spent the morning in the way station's common room. The keeper's wife, Martha, took a shine to Adelaide and spent hours sharing valuable advice about frontier living, everything from how to preserve game meat to dealing with snake bites, and which local plants had medicinal properties. Garrett spent the time conferring with the station keeper about trail conditions ahead and the latest news of Comanche movements. By midday, he seemed satisfied that they could proceed safely. "The trails should be passable now," he told Adelaide. If we make good time, we could reach the outskirts of Park City territory by tomorrow evening." The news brought mixed emotions to Adelaide. While she was eager to reach her destination and begin her new life, it also meant parting ways with Garrett. The thought left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. They set out after noon, the going easier than Adelaide had feared. The storm had indeed washed away their tracks, making it unlikely that the Comanche scouts had maintained their pursuit. As they traveled, Adelaide found herself watching Garrett more often, memorizing the way he sat his horse, the particular tilt of his hat, the sound of his rare but rewarding laugh. She was collecting memories, she realized, preparing herself for his eventual departure. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered valley, Adelaide found herself wishing for some reason to delay their arrival in Park City. The thought was selfish, and foolish Garrett had already gone far beyond what could reasonably be expected of a chance-met stranger. She had no right to wish for more of his time. Yet when he handed her a cup of coffee and their fingers brushed, the jolt that ran through her confirmed what she had been trying to deny. She was falling for Garrett Kane, the quiet cowboy who had promised to get her through this journey and was keeping his word with steadfast determination. "Penny for your thoughts," Garrett said, settling beside her with his own coffee. Adelaide smiled ruefully. "They're hardly worth that much. I was just thinking about the ranch, wondering what awaits me there." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Garrett studied her face for a moment as though he sensed the omission, but he didn't press. "Your uncle's place was well regarded," he said instead. "Good water rights, decent grazing land. From what I recall, he ran about 200 head of cattle and had a small but quality horse breeding operation." "It sounds overwhelming," Adelaide admitted. "I know nothing about running a ranch." "You'll learn," Garrett assured her. "And there's likely a foreman still there who knows the operation. Your uncle wouldn't have left things unattended." The practical advice was helpful, but it did nothing to address the real source of Adelaide's anxiety, the prospect of facing this new challenge alone without Garrett's steady presence beside her. "Will you?" she began, then faltered. "That is, would you consider staying on just for a short while, to help me get established?" The request cost her pride, but Adelaide forced herself to meet his eyes. "I would pay you fairly, of course." Something flickered in Garrett's gaze, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. "You don't need to pay me, Adelaide." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart quicken. "I was already planning to offer my help, at least until you're settled." Relief and something warmer flooded through her. "Thank you. I'm very grateful." Garrett's hand covered hers briefly. "It's no hardship to spend more time in your company." The simple statement, delivered in his straightforward manner, held more meaning than flowery declarations from other men ever had. Adelaide found herself blushing like a schoolgirl. They continued their journey the next day with renewed energy. As Garrett had predicted, by late afternoon, they could see the distant outlines of settlements, scattered ranches on the approach to Park City. "We'll reach your uncle's place by nightfall," Garrett told her. "It's about 5 miles outside of town proper, to the northeast." Adelaide's stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. After weeks of travel and danger, she was about to reach her destination, her new home. The reality of it was suddenly overwhelming. "What if I can't do this?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not suited to this life?" Garrett reined his horse closer to the wagon. "Adelaide Hayes, I've watched you handle a broken wagon in hostile territory without breaking down. I've seen you outride a storm and face potential attack with courage. If anyone can make a success of this new life, it's you." His conviction bolstered her confidence. "With your help," she reminded him, "for as long as you need it." he promised. The sun was setting when they finally turned onto the long drive leading to the Hayes Ranch. The main house came into view, a substantial log structure with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and corrals stretched beyond. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling hills, and a small herd of horses moved gracefully across a meadow. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall and wiry, with graying hair and a weathered face. He squinted at them suspiciously, one hand resting near the pistol at his hip. "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." Garrett raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. "Evening, friend. We're bringing Miss Adelaide Hayes to claim her inheritance. This is Henry Hayes's niece." The man's posture relaxed slightly, though his expression remained cautious. "Miss Hayes, we got the letter saying you were coming, but that was weeks ago. Started to think you weren't going to make it." "The journey took longer than expected," Adelaide replied, climbing down from the wagon with Garrett's assistance. "My wagon broke down in Colorado territory. If not for Mr. Kane's help, I might not have made it at all." The man approached, studying her face carefully. "You have the Hayes look about you. Your uncle had the same eyes." He extended a weathered hand. "Tom Wilson. I was your uncle's foreman for 15 years. Adelaide shook his hand, relieved to find a welcome, however cautious. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Wilson. I hope you'll be willing to continue in your position. I have much to learn about ranching." Wilson nodded, seeming to approve of her directness. "I'll stay on at least until you get your bearings. Your uncle was good to me." "Least I can do is make sure his place passes to good hands." His gaze shifted to Garrett. "Kane, is it? Don't believe we've met before." "Garrett Kane," Garrett confirmed. "I've been escorting Miss Hayes from Colorado." Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly, and Adelaide saw recognition in his eyes. Clearly, Garrett's reputation extended even here. "Well, you're both welcome. Come on inside. Mrs. Wilson will have supper ready, and you look like you could use a proper meal." The main house was comfortable and well-maintained, with solid furniture and practical amenities. Mrs. Wilson, a capable woman in her 50s, welcomed Adelaide warmly and immediately set about adding 2 more places at the table. Over a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread luxuries after weeks of trail food, Wilson filled Adelaide in on the ranch operations. Henry Hayes had left the place in good order, with 25,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, 30 quality horses, and a small but loyal staff of ranch hands. "Your uncle was well respected in these parts," Wilson explained. "Fair in his dealings, honest to a fault. The men who work here are good people. They're curious about you, of course, but willing to give you a chance to prove yourself." "That's all I ask," Adelaide said. "I know I have much to learn, but I'm not afraid of hard work." Wilson nodded approvingly. "Your uncle said as much in his letters about you. Said you had a good head on your shoulders and more grit than most men he knew." He glanced at Garrett. "And what about you, Kane? Just passing through, or do you plan to stay on a while?" Adelaide held her breath, waiting for Garrett's answer, though she already knew what he would say. "I'll be staying to help Miss Hayes get established," Garrett replied. "If that's agreeable to all concerned." Wilson exchanged a look with his wife that Adelaide couldn't quite interpret. "We can use another experienced hand, especially one who knows horses as well as you do. Your reputation with horseflesh precedes you." After supper, Wilson showed them to their rooms. The house was large enough that privacy wasn't a concern, with Adelaide taking her uncle's former bedroom and Garrett settled in a comfortable guest room down the hall. Alone in her new room, Adelaide found herself both exhausted and strangely energized. She ran her fingers over her uncle's possessions books on animal husbandry and ranch management that would prove valuable personal items that offered glimpses into the man she'd barely known. A photograph on the bedside table showed a younger version of her father standing beside a man who must have been Uncle Henry, the family resemblance unmistakable. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Garrett standing there, looking somewhat awkward. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right," he said. "It's been quite a journey." Adelaide smiled, touched by his concern. "I'm fine, a little overwhelmed, but happy to be here at last." She hesitated, then added softly, "and grateful that you'll be staying on." Garrett's expression softened. "Get some rest, Adelaide. Tomorrow we can start figuring out your new life here." "Our new life," she corrected impulsively, then blushed at her presumption. "I mean, I know what you mean," Garrett said gently, "and I like the sound of it." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Good night, Adelaide." "Good night, Garrett," she whispered. She watched him walk down the hallway, his tall figure silhouetted against the lamplight. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Adelaide felt truly hopeful about the future, not just because she had reached her destination, but because the journey had brought her something she hadn't expected to find. A partner who saw her strength rather than her vulnerability, who offered support without demanding submission. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Adelaide immersed herself in learning every aspect of ranch operations. True to his word, Garrett stayed, proving himself invaluable not just to Adelaide but to the ranch as a whole. His expertise with horses complemented Wilson's knowledge of cattle, and together they began planning improvements that would increase the ranch's profitability. Adelaide threw herself into the work with determination, rising before dawn each day to learn from Wilson and the other hands. She mastered basic riding skills quickly, learned to mend fences, helped with calving, and began to understand the complex economics of ranching. In the evenings, she studied her uncle's books and ledgers, applying her merchant's daughter background to streamline the ranch's finances. Through it all, Garrett was a steady presence, encouraging without coddling, teaching without condescension. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the days and often spending evenings on the porch, discussing plans for the ranch's future. As the weeks passed, Adelaide became increasingly aware of the growing attachment between them. It was evident in the way Garrett's eyes sought hers across a room, in the casual touches that lingered a moment longer than necessary, in the conversations that stretched late into the night. Yet neither of them spoke of these feelings directly, both perhaps wary of disrupting the partnership they had built. Adelaide sensed that Garrett was giving her time to establish herself, to find her footing in her new role before complicating matters with romance. She appreciated his restraint, even as she longed for more. The turning point came nearly 2 months after their arrival at the Hayes Ranch. A neighboring rancher, Samuel Blackwell, had been making increasingly aggressive moves to acquire Adelaide's land, first with offers to buy, then with thinly veiled threats about the difficulties a woman would face running a ranch alone. When several of Adelaide's cattle were found on Blackwell's land, allegedly having broken through a fence, Garrett and Wilson rode out to investigate. They returned grim-faced, with news that the fence had been deliberately cut. "Blackwell's trying to provoke an incident," Wilson explained as they gathered in the main house. "He figures if he can cause enough trouble, you'll give up and sell to him." "Well, he's mistaken," Adelaide said firmly. "This is my home now, and I have no intention of selling to anyone, especially not a man who resorts to such tactics." "He won't stop with cattle," Garrett warned. "Men like Blackwell escalate when they don't get their way." His prediction proved accurate sooner than any of them expected. 3 days later, Adelaide was returning from checking the western pasture when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of the ranch house. Spurring her horse forward, she crested a rise to see one of the outbuildings, the equipment barn, fully engulfed in flames. She raced toward the chaos, where ranch hands were already forming a bucket line from the well to the fire. Garrett was in the thick of it, directing men and fighting the blaze with grim determination. Adelaide dismounted and rushed to help, grabbing an empty bucket from a returning hand. For nearly an hour they fought the fire, managing finally to prevent it from spreading to other buildings, though the equipment barn itself was a total loss. As the last flames died down, leaving smoldering ruins, Adelaide surveyed the damage with dismay. Most of their tools and equipment had been stored there, representing a significant financial loss. Garrett approached, his face streaked with soot, his shirt soaked with sweat and water from the firefighting efforts. "Everyone's accounted for," he reported. "No injuries, thank God." "How did it start?" Adelaide asked, though she already suspected the answer. Garrett's expression hardened. One of the hands saw two riders leaving just before the fire was spotted. Matches and coal oil were found nearby. This was deliberate, Adelaide. "Blackwell," she said grimly. Garrett nodded. "Almost certainly, though proving it will be another matter." "What do? We rebuild," Garrett said simply. "And we increase our vigilance. I'll organize the men into watches. No one rides alone from now on, especially not you." His concern touched her, but Adelaide felt a flash of frustration as well. "I won't be intimidated into hiding on my own property, Garrett." "I'm not suggesting you hide," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm suggesting we be smart. Blackwell wants a reaction once you scared enough to sell or make a mistake he can capitalize on." Adelaide sighed, knowing he was right. "Very well, but I want to ride into town tomorrow, speak with the sheriff. This has gone beyond neighborly disputes." "I'll go with you," Garrett said, in a tone that brooked no argument. The next morning they rode to Park City together. The small but growing town was bustling with activity, miners, ranchers, and merchants going about their business under the shadow of the surrounding mountains. The sheriff's office was a modest building on the main street, distinguished by the territorial flag flying outside. Sheriff James Morris was a solidly built man in his 50s with graying hair and shrewd eyes. He listened to their account of the fire and the ongoing harassment from Blackwell with an expression that grew increasingly troubled. "I've had other complaints about Blackwell," he admitted when Adelaide finished speaking. "Man's been pushing boundaries since he arrived 2 years ago. Problem is, proving anything against him is difficult. He's careful to keep his own hands clean." "So you're saying there's nothing you can do?" Adelaide asked, frustration evident in her voice. The sheriff sighed. "I didn't say that, Miss Hayes. I'll ride out to Blackwell's place, have a word with him, let him know I'm watching. Sometimes that's enough to make a man think twice." "And if it isn't?" Garrett asked quietly. Sheriff Morris gave him a measuring look. "Then we deal with that when it comes. In the meantime, you folks would be wise to stay alert." His gaze shifted back to Adelaide. "Your uncle was well respected in these parts, Miss Hayes. There are plenty of folks in town who'd be willing to help if you need it." As they left the sheriff's office, Adelaide felt only marginally reassured. "Do you think the sheriff's warning will make any difference?" she asked Garrett. "It might slow Blackwell down, make him more cautious, but men like that don't usually back off entirely." Garrett's expression was grim. "We should prepare for more trouble." They spent the rest of the day in town, purchasing replacement tools and supplies for the ranch. Several townspeople approached Adelaide to introduce themselves and express condolences about the fire, offering assistance in various forms. It was heartening to discover that her uncle's good reputation extended well beyond the ranch boundaries. By the time they headed back, Adelaide was feeling more positive. "At least we know we have allies in town," she remarked as they rode. "That's valuable," Garrett agreed. "Out here, good neighbors can make all the difference." They were about halfway back to the ranch when Garrett suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert, his hand moving toward his rifle. "What is it?" Adelaide asked, instantly on guard. "Riders," Garrett said tersely. "Coming up fast behind us." Adelaide turned to look. 3 horsemen were approaching rapidly from the direction of town. As they drew closer, she recognized Blackwell himself in the lead, flanked by 2 rough-looking men she hadn't seen before. "Keep riding," Garrett instructed. "I'll deal with this." "No," Adelaide said firmly. "This is my fight too. We stand together." A brief smile touched Garrett's lips. "As you wish." He positioned his horse beside hers as they waited for the approaching riders. Blackwell drew up a few yards away, his face flushed with anger or exertion. He was a large man in his 40s, with small eyes and a perpetual scowl. "You've been to see the sheriff about me," he said without preamble. "About a fire on my property," Adelaide corrected calmly. "If you've nothing to do with that, then you have nothing to worry about." Blackwell's scowl deepened. "You're making a mistake, Miss Hayes. A woman has no business running a ranch. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll be there to pick up the pieces, but my offer won't be as generous next time." "Miss Hayes isn't interested in selling," Garrett interjected, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. "And she won't be intimidated by threats or sabotage." Blackwell's gaze shifted to Garrett, his expression calculating. "Kane, I've heard of you. Gunslinger turned scout turned. What? Ranch hand. Seems like a step down." "I find honest work with good people preferable to bullying tactics," Garrett replied evenly. One of Blackwell's men snickered but fell silent at a glare from his employer. "This is your last friendly warning," Blackwell said, turning back to Adelaide. "Sell to me now, at a fair price, or face the consequences." "A woman alone, she's not alone," Garrett interrupted, his hand now resting openly on his pistol. "And this conversation is over. Ride on, Blackwell." For a tense moment, Adelaide thought Blackwell might push the confrontation further. His hand twitched near his own weapon, and his companions shifted nervously. But something in Garrett's steady gaze seemed to give him pause. "This isn't over," Blackwell said finally, turning his horse. "Think about my offer, Miss Hayes. It won't remain open indefinitely." They watched as the 3 men rode away, waiting until they were well out of sight before continuing their journey. "That man will be trouble," Adelaide said quietly. "Yes," Garrett agreed, "but we'll handle it together." The simple declaration warmed Adelaide more than any elaborate promises could have. Together. The word held such promise, such comfort. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill before the ranch came into view, Adelaide reined in her horse. "Garrett," she said, her voice suddenly uncertain, "I need to ask you something." He stopped beside her, his expression curious. "What is it?" Adelaide took a deep breath. "You've been at the ranch for nearly 2 months now. You've more than fulfilled your promise to help me get established, yet you haven't spoken of moving on." She met his eyes directly. "I need to know, are you staying because you feel obligated or because you want to?" Garrett was silent for a long moment, his gaze holding hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and earnest. "I haven't spoken of leaving because I don't want to leave, not the ranch and certainly not you, Adelaide." Her heart quickened at his words. "Then why haven't you?" "That is, I thought perhaps." She faltered, unused to such directness in matters of the heart. Garrett smiled, understanding her unspoken question. "I wanted to give you time, to establish yourself here, to be sure of your own mind. I didn't want you to feel that my help came with expectations." "And now?" Adelaide asked softly. In answer, Garrett dismounted and moved to help her down from her horse. As her feet touched the ground, his hands remained at her waist, holding her close. "Now," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I'd like to court you properly, Adelaide Hayes. If you'll allow it." Adelaide felt joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I think we're well past the point of formal courting, Garrett Kane. We've faced danger together, worked side by side, built something here that's more than just a ranch. What are you saying?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm saying that I love you," Adelaide replied simply. "I have for some time now, and I'd like us to build a future together if that's what you want too." Garrett's answer was to draw her closer, one hand coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you, Adelaide. Have since that first day on the trail when you stood your ground despite a broken wagon and hostile territory." When his lips finally met hers, Adelaide felt as though everything in her life, the journey west, the hardships, the challenges of the ranch had been leading to this moment, this man. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left her breathless. "I'll get you through this," Garrett had promised that first day, and he had kept his word not by rescuing her like some helpless damsel, but by standing beside her, supporting her strength rather than supplanting it. As they rode the final distance to the ranch, side by side, Adelaide knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, from Blackwell's threats to the everyday hardships of ranch life, they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. In the months that followed, the Hayes Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Adelaide's head for business combined with Garrett's practical knowledge created a partnership that extended well beyond the personal. They expanded the horse breeding operation, focusing on quality stock that soon gained recognition throughout the territory. The cattle herd grew, and with careful management of grazing lands and water resources, the ranch became one of the most productive in the region. Blackwell made good on his threats, attempting various forms of sabotage and intimidation. But with the ranch hands fiercely loyal to Adelaide and Garrett, and with growing support from neighboring ranchers who had their own grievances against Blackwell, his efforts ultimately failed. When he was finally caught red-handed attempting to poison one of the ranch's water sources, Sheriff Morris had the evidence he needed for an arrest. Blackwell was tried and convicted, his ranch sold off to pay his debts. Adelaide and Garrett were married the following spring, in a ceremony attended by the entire ranch staff and many from town who had come to respect the unusual couple. Mrs. Wilson decorated the main house with wildflowers, and a feast was prepared that would be talked about for years to come. As Adelaide stood beside Garrett, exchanging vows beneath the old oak tree that her uncle had planted decades earlier, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A broken wagon in hostile territory had seemed like disaster at the time, but had led her to the greatest blessing of her life. "I'll get you through this," Garrett had promised that day on the trail, and he had, through danger and hardship, through learning and growth, through the building of a life neither of them could have imagined when they first met. And now, as husband and wife, they stood ready to face whatever the future might bring together, as equal partners in life and love. 5 years later, the Hayes Kane Ranch was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, 3-year-old Henry, named for Adelaide's uncle, and 1-year-old Elizabeth, with another child on the way. The horse breeding operation had gained national recognition, with buyers coming from as far as Kentucky and Virginia to purchase their stock. On the anniversary of the day they met, Garrett took Adelaide riding to their favorite spot overlooking the ranch, the same hill where she had finally confessed her love years before. "You ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" she asked as they sat side by side, watching the sunset paint the land in shades of gold and crimson. Garrett took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I try not to dwell on might have beens. But I do know this: when I promised to get you through that journey, I had no idea I was really promising myself a lifetime of happiness." Adelaide leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "A broken wagon turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." "To us," Garrett corrected, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, the lights of their ranch house glowing welcomingly in the distance, Adelaide reflected that sometimes the most treacherous paths led to the most beautiful destinations. What had begun as a desperate situation in hostile territory had become the greatest love story she could have imagined, one that would continue to unfold, day by day, for all the years to come.